Chapter 80 Craftsman's Carriage. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Eisen stood up from his bed in the inn after lying down in his capsule again literally a few seconds ago. That conversation with Benji not too long ago helped Eisen calm down a little bit. After that whole bunch of trouble that Melody is going to cause, he wasn't sure whether or not Sophia might actually bring that boy that Melody kept saw her with. Benji told him that he talked to Sophia about him a few times before, and the boy was apparently even her best friend, so it may be possible that she would bring him along. Eisen just wanted to know if Benji knew anything about the situation, since he knew that he and Sophia talked quite a lot. But when he was filled in about everything by his grandson, Eisen managed to relax and took his time getting groceries and something from Wawa to eat for lunch. Now that he was back in the game, it was time to make his way back over to Denmer's smithy to prepare all of the things he needed to finish off the carriage as soon as possible. He greeted Bree, who was already waiting for Eisen, and they made their way to the restaurant to eat some breakfast. Since there wasn't anything else to do, and Juk was at work in real life, Eisen and Bree made their way to Dwarf's Delight. They stepped inside and walked to the back of store to meet with Denmere, who rushed over to them the moment that he laid eyes on them. Good mornin' Eisen, good mornin' lass. And good mornin' ta the three of you as well, of course. Denmere exclaimed happily to greet the small group that just entered the workshop. This was quite unusual for him already. As usual he would just wave at them when they came in and basically ignored them for the rest of their stay while he got back to his own work. But this time around, he really just dropped what he was doing to sprint over to Eisen. And the old man guessed it was kind of understandable that he would be somewhat excited, seeing how Eisen was literally a legend amongst legends within this world. Before Eisen could react though, Denmere already continued. Is there anything I can help you with today? He asked, but Eisen shook his head with a soft chuckle. No, I don't really need much help. I just have to make some small steel parts for a carriage. Is it fine if I borrow the same forge as usual? Of course. Go ahead. If you need me, I'll be working on my own items. Just call me, Yi Gear. Denmere close to yelled this out happily while Eisen began walking over to his usual forge and changed into his blacksmithing outfit in a small, separate changing room. After he got back out and placed his clothes next to Bree's backpack, Eisen made his way to the storage room to get a few ingots of steel, immediately getting to work when he brings them back to the forge. He made a few different simple angled metal plates in large quantities to hold the parts together, before then making 4 long rectangles which he connected at each end to create something like a loop. Eisen made sure that it was the right size, repeatedly measuring the diameter so that it was just a tiny bit smaller than the actual wheels. Once he finished that, Eisen thought about stopping and getting back to the woodworkers to continue building the carriage, but instead he chose to make some other items first. They weren't anything amazing, just a frisbee-sized steel version of the coin hanging around Eisen's neck, as well as some smaller decorative items to attach to the inside of the carriage here and there. Excited to see that he could finally start assembling the carriage, Eisen quickly moved on and packed up the items he just made, changing back into his regular crafting outfit before he and Bree decided to go back to the woodworkers. Denmere seemed kind of disappointed by that, but Eisen couldn't do anything about that. Rather, Denmere just made him leave faster, since Eisen constantly felt the dwarf stares on his back. With a loud sigh, Eisen hoped that not everybody that found out he was one of the 5 that peaked would treat him like that from that moment on. Luckily, Bree was already starting to return to her usual way of interacting with Eisen, so he didn't need to worry about that at the very least. For now, Eisen and Bree walked back to the room where the old man began building the carriage, placing the different parts down onto the ground sorted. First, it was time to finish the wheels. And Eisen didn't simply want to attach a regular steel ring to it, but instead placed the loop onto the ground and got out a small needle to begin carving an enchantment into its surface. The enchantments that he carved onto the steel surfaces were quite simple. It was an enchantment that would give the wheels both better grip as well as better stability, and it was supposed to pull mana from a mana crystal that would be placed into each of the wheels. Later, Eisen would add even more places where such mana crystal batteries were needed, so he was already thinking about how to efficiently give all of those mana crystals the mana they needed to function, and decided to just place a central crystal into the inside of the carriage, allowing him to pour his mana inside of that and have it automatically be transferred to all of the other crystals around. But that should wait for later. But for now, Eisen just placed the mana crystal batteries into the wheel's hubs and made sure that the enchantment could be activated. Eisen placed the condition on it that it would only activate when the wheel was turning, so it at least wouldn't take too much unnecessary mana. The next step that Eisen went for was to heat up the steel ring as much as possible with his magic element, while holding it on tongs of course, so that it would expand enough to fit around the wheel. When it was starting to glow a slight orange, the loop was placed around the outside of the wheel and water was poured onto it to make sure the hot metal loop cooled and shrunk back down properly, and completely burnt into the wood while it was at it. This, and the fact that Eisen made the ring slightly smaller than the actual wheel, made sure that the metal wouldn't be able to slip off without forcefully being pulled off. That on its own would still take quite a lot of force, though. Eisen repeated this 3 more times until he could happily say that the wheels were now finished. Once that was done, it was time to fully create the base. Eisen connected 2 of the wheels with one of the poles that would act as the axle, and then simply placed the box that he made around it, doing the same for the other 2 wheels as well. When this was done, Eisen placed the part that would let the front wheels rotate onto that dedicated spot on the box, before adding the center dot piece that would act as something like a spine to connect the 2 axles. Eisen moved that structure back and forth a few times, and was quite satisfied with how smoothly the wheels were moving. After nodding to himself, the old man continued. He connected the front axle to the pole that Kabaram would pull at, and then simply started the base framework once he was done with that. Eisen placed 2 square planks over each, carving gaps in the center so that they could be pushed together, in a cross, with each of the ends being the spot where the corners of the carriage would be, and then placed a third, shorter plank above those 2 so that its ends would be below the spots where the 2 center wooden pillars would end up. This structure was then connected to the wheel base that Eisen made, properly affixing it at different spots, especially making sure that he properly connected the axle boxes to it with the help of those angled steel plates he made at Denmer's. After that, Eisen added the 6 carved pillars to each end of the cross structure, before connecting each pillar at both the top and the bottom in a square outline with the help of more square planks, creating something like a box shape already. As the next step, Eisen simply added regular planks to the outside to create the first walls. Making these walls wasn't hard, it just took up some time, and since Eisen had to do basically the same thing on the inside once more, this was just work that would take most people at the very least a whole day. But since it was Eisen that was working on it, and because of his improved speed and currently basically infinite endurance, he managed to finish it in just a few hours. And when he started adding the planks on the inside of the carriage as well, he purposefully left some spots open to more easily access the space between the inner and outer layers of planks. If he had simply closed everything up, Eisen would have lost quite a lot of space, which he instead used to create a few different small cupboards and places to hang his tools, as well as some hiding places where he could place some of his money in case someone tried robbing the carriage. But there were a few spaces where he left especially much space, where he could create 2 simple things that could just be folded downward when needed and left up against the wall to open up space at every other time. One of them was for Eisen's workbench, while the other was for a bed. Of course, the latter was something that Eisen himself didn't need, which is also why he made it relatively small to accommodate an average dot-sized person, or in the case of Eisen's current party, a person with the body of a young girl. It absolutely didn't matter where Eisen slept, since he was logged out anyway, and it didn't seem to be too big of a deal even if he slept on usually incredibly uncomfortable and uneven ground. When he woke up in the game, there wasn't any uncomfortable feeling anymore anyway. So, if he needed to sleep, he would do so while simply sitting down on the ground, while Bree could have the space in the bed that he made. After all, her situation was quite different. She seemed to actually be affected by where she slept like people usually were in real life. So he wanted to be nice and make the little time that she actually needed to sleep as comfortable as possible. On top of that, who knew who else they might pick up every once in a while. It wouldn't hurt to have a place a guest could lay down on. And if nobody was sleeping on it, it would obviously double as a regular seat, so that was quite good as well. And Eisen's worktable was quite simple as well, at least for now. He would probably add some little things here and there over time, but for now it was just a thin wooden surface with legs that would fold down when Eisen pulled the table away from the wall. This could of course also be used as a regular table to eat on or just sit at during a conversation. Neither of these parts took up a lot of space even if they were both folded down at the same time, so there was more than enough place to stack a few crates or 1 or 2 barrels on top of each other. Eisen also made a few simple windows that could be opened and closed whenever, as well as a door in the back of the carriage. The roof was quite simple as well. Eisen would probably continue decorating this whole thing over time, but for now it was simply a regular slanted roof to get rid of water or things that dropped onto it from trees. And that was it. The carriage was finally finished. There was only one part missing, the plate-sized steel recreation of Eisen's coin. He carved a circle into the wood on the door on the carriage's backside, and tightly fitted the piece inside. With a satisfied smile, Eisen crossed his arms and nodded. Done. Craftsman's carriage, rank 2, quality. Perfect, description, a carriage created by the Omni craftsmaster Eisen. Multiple carving have been added to it to show its affiliation with craftsmanship. It has been made with high quality, durable wood, and the wheels were even enchanted so that they made travel a slight bit easier. Inside of the actual structure, multiple storage places have been installed, on top of a pre-installed table and bed that can easily be stashed away. Due to already having reached the peak as a limit breaker, you will not gain anything from creating an overwhelming quality item through the woodworking skill. Eisen, race. Giant, dwarf halfling, occupation. Omni craftsmaster, level 71, HP. 1876, MP. 1898, STR. 106, End. 106, AGI. 103, Int. 107, Wis. 108, Cha. 11, Titles, Casanova, Champion, Original of the Mechanical Arts, Limit Breaker V, Skills, A Dwarf's Hands, Rank 2, Level 99, A Giant's Strength, Rank 2, Level 81, Alchemy, Rank 2, Level 49, Blacksmithing, Rank 2, Level 58, Cooking, Rank 0, Level 68, Crafting Space, Rank 2, Level 6, Dismembering, Rank 0, Level 1, Drawing, Rank 1, Level 6, Enchanting, Rank 2, Level 12, Flame of the Earth Magic, Rank 1, Level 51, Golmancy, Rank 0, Level 68, Leatherworking, Rank 2, Level 16, Lockpicking, Rank 0, Level 1, Mana Copy, Rank 1, Level 26, Mana Double, Rank 2, Level 46, Mana Manipulation, Rank 2, Level 41, Swordsmanship, Rank 2, Level 75, Tailoring, Rank 2, Level 45, Taming, Rank 1, Level 76, Tool Connection, Rank 1, Level 98, Truth Seeing Eye, Rank 0, Level 35, Woodworking, Rank 1, Level 76. Chapter 81 Preparations. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Alright, perfect. Eisen said with a happy smile and nodded in satisfaction. Now he only needed to properly connect Cab Aram to it so that he could pull it through the streets. For that purpose, he already added something on the horse automaton that would make this far easier. On the side of its body, he added some connectors, letting Eisen simply connect two poles to its body and then to the pole at the front of the carriage used to pull and steer it. Cab Aram also had two connectors by the sides of its mouth where rope could be connected to more easily control his movement while Eisen or Bree were sitting on the small bench at the front of the carriage. So Eisen quickly prepared those two poles and pushed them onto the connectors at the side of Cab Aram's body and then to the carriage, before attaching the rope to the horse's mouth. After slowly packing up a few scraps and placing them into an empty crate that he already had, Eisen quickly cleaned up and then opened the large wooden door leading to the streets of Melrose to test how well the carriage can drive. Considering that its quality was high enough to break through woodworking, despite the fact that breaking through skills was supposed to be harder now that he reached the peak of his title, it should probably work just fine, but Eisen still wanted to see if there were any little tweaks needed and what kind of enchantments would be good to add to the wooden frame of the carriage to make it more stable and durable in total. He first wanted to see how well the enchantments on the wheels helped before deciding on what else to place onto it, since Eisen wouldn't be able to just erase the enchantment. At least not yet. Moram explained to him what would happen if you just tried to erase an enchantment without the appropriate rank in the skill. It would basically cause a surge of energy to explode either outward or inward depending on the enchantment, quite easily being able to destroy the item or surface it was placed on, as well as damage the one that was removing the enchantment. That was also why Eisen placed the enchantment on the inside of the metal ring, so that it wouldn't scratch up and be destroyed while they were driving. So, if Eisen wanted to remove an enchantment safely, he would either have to wait until his enchanting skill reached a higher rank, or fully remove the piece that he enchanted. And since that would just be a waste of time, he wanted to try and make sure the enchantments were as appropriate as possible. After he opened the door to the outside, Eisen brought Olu inside the carriage and set Kuria down on her back, while Bree was waiting outside on the street to make sure Eisen wasn't crashing into anything. After all, this was the first time in quite a few years that he steered a carriage. Once they were finally on the outside, Bree quickly closed the door back down and joined Eisen on the front bench. "Alright, Cab Aram, slowly walk forward now." Eisen commanded the automaton, and it did as told. What they would do in order to test the carriage was to drive it to Everything Magic, Moram's shop, and grab those barrels that Eisen prepared not too long ago. This way, they were able to test out different scenarios perfectly. First, driving up or down a mountain, and then driving with or without cargo. So this was the perfect way to look at what kinds of enchantments they needed. But as far as Eisen was concerned, this carriage seemed to drive quite well, and didn't seem to shake all that much. It might be a bit different inside, but he'll just have to see about that in a bit. Not too long after they started driving down the slope, they reached Moram's shop, and Eisen told Cab Aram to stop walking and had Bree wait with the carriage while he went inside to grab the barrels. Luckily, Eisen's strength stat was quite high, so he more than easily managed to carry the barrels on his own and placed them down into the back of the carriages. And once he thanked Moram for giving him the barrels in the first place and letting them be stored in his workshop, Eisen stepped into the back of the carriage and asked Bree to start driving back up the slope. However, at first, Cab Aram didn't listen to Bree. That was obviously because she wasn't his owner, and both Bree and Eisen forgot about that for a second. So, Eisen commanded Cab Aram to also listen to Bree's commands, and now Bree managed to also properly drive the carriage back to the woodworkers. During the ride, Eisen noticed a few things already. It was less shaky than he expected, but it was definitely still way too shaky to actually do anything major inside. What he was crafting would probably suffer a lot from the movements of the carriage. At the very least, the barrels seemed to be standing quite stable, so they would only need to worry about that if they had a lot of cargo or if they were driving on an especially unstable ground. But if that was the case, he could simply tie everything together or to a bit in the wall to make sure it couldn't move, so that wasn't a big deal. But this definitely gave Eisen all that he needed to know, and when they got back to the woodworkers, Eisen had Bree parked the carriage by the side of the road so that other carriages could still pass along, and then squatted down onto the ground while taking out a few needles and mana crystals out of Bree's backpack. "What kind of enchantments are you putting on it now?" Bree asked curiously, looking over Eisen's shoulder while he began carving the enchanting circle into one of the corners of the room. It seemed like she was basically treating him like usual again, which Eisen was more than just glad about. So with a soft chuckle, he began to explain. "I will place 4 enchantments inside of here, 1 in each corner, that will stabilize the space inside of here further. I'm not entirely sure if it will work, but I'm pretty sure it should. And that's about it. I'll enchant the outside with defense enchantments at some point, but that can wait," Eisen explained while carving the enchantment into the wooden board. Enchanting just got easier and easier already, and Eisen was actually able to make the enchantment circles quite easily with only minimal use of tools, so he was quite happy about that. Once the 4 enchantments were carved into each of the corners, Eisen placed 4 mana crystals that were enchanted so that they could store mana behind the boards of each corner. Now it was time to set up the mana supply system. It was really quite simple. Eisen flattened a relatively large mana crystal and formed it into a disc, before carving out a small space on the wall next to the door at the back of the carriage to place it into. He then carved a simple enchantment that was supposed to transfer the mana that it got to the 8 mana crystals all around the carriage. The old man wasn't entirely sure if this would work properly like he did it, but he would find out soon. The image that Eisen used for the enchantment was simply the structure of the carriage, with the locations of the mana crystals highlighted. This way also definitely meant that he had to redo the enchantment whenever he added a new mana crystal battery to the carriage, but at least mana crystals really weren't expensive, so that fact didn't matter too much. And it would be especially easy once he was able to erase enchantments. Anyway, now it was time to try the enchantment out, and Eisen placed his palm onto the cold crystal surface before pouring his mana out of his hand and into the enchantment. Immediately, the mana split up into 8 thin streams, each moving toward a different one of the mana crystals. Eisen continued providing the enchantment with his mana until the 8 streams disappeared, which was probably a sign that they couldn't be filled up any more than that. With a satisfied nod, Eisen stepped back through the opening in the front of the carriage and sat down on the bench, taking Kabram's reins back into his hands. "Now we have the most important thing to start traveling. Should we get to work with supplies now? Do you have any suggestions on what to buy?" Eisen asked Bree while starting to drive the carriage toward the place where he remembered some good food shops to be. The Fey-kin thought for a bit, before starting to tell Eisen her opinion. "I think we should mainly see to taking food that we can keep for a long time with good nutrition. So a little bit of dried meat, but mainly dried fruits like apricots or plums. I think that finding a wild beast would be far easier than finding fruits, so it would be more important to find that. And then we can of course get different long-lasting herbs, as well as salt, pepper, and a bit of sugar. But all in all, we shouldn't take too much," she explained, and Eisen began to frown in light confusion. "What do you mean? Why shouldn't we take a lot from here?" Eisen asked, and immediately understood Bree's reasoning. Well, Melro is a mining town, and we don't really have any major fields, so most of the produce that's sold here is imported. And since we're going to Ornir next, we should pass by a farming village within a few days. I've been there once before, and they have high-quality produce for cheap, so it wouldn't make too much sense to buy it from here, since the quality will be a bit worse while being more expensive. We should just stock up enough to last us till we get to that farming village, and then buy larger amounts of supplies there." "I see, that definitely makes sense. Then how about you take care of the purchases and get us all we need food-wise, and I'll go somewhere and buy some crafting supplies. I'll leave the carriage to you, so just put everything inside." "Okay. Bree agreed with a bright smile while Eisen got to a stop in front of the first few stores, then hopped off of the bench, telling Alu to stay and buy the carriage while he placed Kuria onto his shoulder. Eisen made his way toward a few stores that he was interested in, although he directly skipped over one that only sold metal, since he had no way to smith inside the carriage anyway. But instead, he visited a few stores selling different fabrics, leathers, or types of wood that Eisen could craft different smaller things in the carriage to raise his skill levels. He could have also visited the shops of his skill.teachers to buy materials directly from them, but Eisen felt like that would be nothing different than treating them like cheap material sources, and he didn't want that. Besides, like this he could buy all of it while in one place, and didn't have to make his way all across town again. On top of these simple materials, Eisen also bought some different seeds for Korea to practice her plant control skill on. Now, all that Eisen needed to do was say goodbye to all those that helped him. Chapter 82 Party Preparation. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Did you get everything that we need? Eisen asked Bree once he placed all of his crafting materials into the back of the carriage. The Faye.Kin was about to respond, but then stopped immediately and moved her eyes around to look into empty space, meaning that she was currently looking at her database, where she probably created a small list of things that they would need. After a few seconds, she finally replied with a bright smile and a nod. "Emicham. We've got everything. What now?" Bree asked with a smile, and Eisen began scratching his beard. "I was thinking that we should just visit people that helped us out and say our goodbyes to them. It might be a while until we can see them again, after all. Maybe we could invite them for a small party at the inn tonight." "Oh. That sounds great. Let's do that." Bree responded excitedly while the two of them sat down on the front bench of the carriage, and Eisen commanded Kabaram to start walking. Luckily, most of the shops they wanted to visit were mostly on the way to the stables where they wanted to park the carriage, so it didn't take long to visit everyone. Their first destination was Denmer's shop, Dwarf's Delight. Eisen and Bree stepped inside and made their way to the back of the shop to look for Denmir, who once more immediately hurried over to Eisen's side once he laid eyes on him. "Hey Denmir. So, we just finished all the preparations for starting to travel, so we will probably leave quite soon. We wanted to invite you to a farewell party at the inn for that tonight." Eisen quickly explained, and the dwarf in front of him immediately nodded. "Of course. I'll come, definitely. Thanks for inviting me. Don't worry, I wouldn't throw a party without you." Eisen chuckled and gave Denmir the rough time where they planned to meet up in the inn's bar, before they were on their way again. Their next stop was at Falmira's tailoring shop, Beautiful Clothes. When they entered, the dwarven lady Falmira was, like usual, sitting at the front counter with a notepad, apparently drawing a few different sketches inside. When she saw Eisen and Bree, her eyes lit up and she smiled happily. "Hello. Long time no see, you two. How have you been?" she asked and stood up to properly greet the two people that just walked in. With a soft chuckle, Eisen responded by explaining that they wanted to leave Melro within the next few days, and that they would be happy if Falmira could join them in a celebration that evening. Of course, she was quite excited about this. "Well, if you're leaving, I can't just let you without properly saying goodbye. I will definitely be there," Falmira exclaimed, and both Eisen and Bree happily smiled and made their way to the next shop where an important person was waiting. Jekyll's Hides, which was the Grandmaster leatherworker Jekyll's shop. To their surprise, even he more than happily agreed to come join them at the party. Out of all the people that Eisen met here in Melro, he was the most cynical, so it was quite weird to actually see him be quite happy and borderline excited for something. This made Eisen feel kind of weird about something already, but he tried to ignore that thought to have fun with his friends tonight. Of course, the next stop was at Moram's magic-related shop, Everything Magic. Eisen worried that he might have some kind of new item to work on, but luckily, he had nothing to do that evening. But there was something else that Eisen noticed. He already noticed that when he came to pick up the barrels before, but he ignored it because he thought that Moram was simply a bit nervous about work or something, but today everyone was acting a little bit different to usual, so Eisen simply had to ask. "Moram, but could it be that Denmir told you about who I am?" he asked, and Moram's face immediately lost all its color. I don't know what you're talking about. The dwarf elf halfling responded while averting his gaze. Yup, Moram definitely knew about it. That Denmir really had to tell all of you, huh? Well, anyway, I would have told you guys sooner or later anyway. So don't worry about it. Me having been one of those that peaked in the past shouldn't matter. Why? Yeah, but it's still so amazing. You were a person that has completely mastered every single craft there was, so me being able to teach you 2 skills is incredibly surreal. Moram explained with a complicated smile, and Eisen couldn't help but chuckle. Don't worry, just see it as fate that we met. Without your help, I wouldn't have gotten this far so quickly. Eisen responded, but Moram immediately shook his head after ripping his eyes open. No, that's not true at all. You would have been able to do this even without my help, or anyone's help. You were the one that discovered skills like these in the first place. Eisen's brows changed into a state somewhere in between surprise and confusion, as he was trying to figure out what Moram was talking about. And apparently, Moram could figure out what that expression meant. Didn't Denmir tell you about that? Then should I explain? Moram asked, looking over to Bree, who simply nodded with an embarrassed smile. She was probably feeling weird that there was something she could have told Eisen, but somehow forgot about. After sighing loudly, Moram began to speak. You see, the ones that peaked weren't only known for reaching the max level, but also for discovering new skills. The Master of Combat found different combat arts, while the Master of Magic found different magic elements and spells. You on the other hand found out numerous things, and not only related to crafting. Amongst those that peaked, you are by far the oldest, and I'm pretty sure you're double the age of even the oldest of the others that peaked. You were the first to figure out numerous things such as what blacksmithing is, for example. You found an incredibly amount of different crafting skills, and even some general skills, such as tactical skills. On top of that, you were also the first that found out what happened when someone reached the absolute peak of a skill. Curious at that last part, Eisen began scratching his beard. Oh. What happens when you reach the peak of a skill, then? Well. You know, the proficiency we gain in skills is also a type of experience, which is why it's displayed in levels. But when we reach the highest proficiency possible, where is that experience supposed to go? That's what you found out. Instead of going toward that skill, it goes toward your actual experience, allowing you to actually level up through using that skill. It's not a lot of experience, but it is still an incredible thing for any craftsman, especially pacifists that want to avoid combat. I see. I didn't know that was a thing. Thanks for explaining all that. Of course, no problem. But I would be careful who you tell about yourself. Denmir only told the 3 of us, since he knew weren't fanatics, but there is something like a religion built around those that peaked. Denmir also told us about his theory with those people appearing out of nowhere. If it really is how he thought, and this theory got out at some point, many of those people might be targeted by those fanatics. Eisen sighed loudly at this. So the game developers even built something like this into the game. They really thought about lots of ways to make this game exciting. Then I really should only tell those I trust. Well, this kind of thing should come out sooner or later, but I would prefer if it was later rather than sooner. Eisen said, and Moram could only nod and respond. Anyway, we'll see you at the party tonight, then. Eisen asked with a smile, causing Moram to smile back. Yes, of course. I wouldn't miss it. And with that, Eisen and Bree left the shop and sat back down in the front of the carriage. The story that the developers came up with was really amazing in his opinion, but Eisen was feeling kind of hurt by the fact that he was supposed to be literally centuries old. He knew he was old, but that was a bit much, wasn't it? Either way, Eisen ignored those thoughts and instead drove the carriage back toward the inn so that they could park it in the stables. Eisen also thought about inviting Belrim as well, but Eisen felt kind of weird about him. Of course he helped Eisen quite a bit, but there was just something off about the way that he acted that gave Eisen chills. He felt like Belrim really wasn't such a good guy as he thought at first. So, Eisen chose to stay away from him as much as possible. After paying the fee to be able to leave their carriage in the stable under the stable's protection, Eisen and Bree made their way back to the inn, and Eisen looked at the current time. Since it was about this late, Juk might actually not come back in time for the party, but should probably be back by the time that Eisen and Bree leave town. He just really wanted to say goodbye to him as well, although this most certainly wouldn't be the last time they saw each other. It was just proper manners to say goodbye to your friends when you leave. But now, back at the inn, Eisen brought Kabaram and Alu back to the room and had them stay there with Bree, while he decided to talk to Innkeeper. Eisen wanted to leave Kuria in the room as well to let her practice plant control while he was gone, but she simply didn't want to leave his side, so Eisen had to bring her along after all. So, Eisen walked up to the innkeeper and greeted him, starting out with some casual conversation before moving on to the two important things that Eisen wanted to ask. So, Bree and I will be leaving quite soon, possibly even tomorrow, so we're throwing something like a small party with a few people. Is it possible to reserve a table in the bar? Eisen asked, and the innkeeper nodded in response. Of course ye can. How many people are you expecting? And when is it startin'? Not too many, we'll just be 6 in total. And it should start around 8 p.m. Got it, I'll prepare a table for ya. But ye're leavin' already, huh? It's been a bit more than a month since Yevi arrived here in Melro, right? The innkeeper asked before writing down the reservation info on a small piece of paper in front of him. Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm not sure if that time seems shorter or longer than that, huh? Eisen laughed loudly, because he really wasn't sure. For once, it passed quite slowly since he did so many different things throughout that time, but then on the other hand, past time always seems shorter in retrospect, especially since Eisen was often simply grinding away while doing the same thing. But at the very least, he had immense fun during this time. During this past month, Eisen had some of the most fun he had in years. Chapter 83 True Use. You are listening at novelfull.audio. There's actually another thing I wanted to ask you. Could you sell me some yeast? I tried buying some at stores in town, but none of them had any. I could have gone to a bakery, but I wanted to try asking here first. Eisen asked, and the dwarven innkeeper nodded lightly. Sure, I don't mind sellin' ya some. Ye plannin' on some brewing? He asked before stepping through a door leading to a seemingly small room in the back, before coming back out with a fist-sized bag of yeast. Yeah, actually. And I can't really do that without yeast, huh? Eisen chuckled while gratefully taking the bag into his hands and paying whatever the innkeeper told him. Where exactly are ye and Bree goin' after leaving Melro? The innkeeper asked while crossing his arms, and Eisen frowned curiously since he wasn't sure what this had to do with brewing. We're planning on going to Ornir next. Why? Ah, perfect. Bree mentioned it, but I wasn't sure. If ye're goin' to Ornir, you should go to a bar called Drowned Sparrow. The owner is an old friend of mine, and he makes the best of any type of alcohol there is. Beer, mead, or spirits, he can make 'em all. He's also figured out some interesting recipes, so he might be worth a visit just to see his newest creation. The innkeeper explained, writing down something on a piece of paper which he then folded up and handed Eisen. He's a bit particular, so he may not want to talk to ya if he doesn't know ye can be trusted. I see. Thanks, Graumer. I'd be happy if you could join us tonight as well, by the way. Eisen explained, and the dwarven innkeeper Graumer laughed wholeheartedly in response. I won't let you tell me that twice then. I'll see you later. With that, Eisen nodded and made his way back to his room and sat down on his bed. He looked over at Bree and smiled. Are you really alright with going tomorrow already? Eisen kind of felt like he decided on all of it himself, and Bree simply went along with it. So now was the last time that Aizen would ask to make sure that Bree was alright with leaving the following day. She's been here for quite a while after all, so leaving may be harder for her than she let on. At least that's what Aizen thought, but it seems like he was worrying for nothing, because Bree instantly replied with her opinion. Yes. I'm alright with it, really. I'm actually super excited. She exclaimed loudly, finally convincing Aizen that he didn't force her to do anything. He replied with a soft smile and laughed lowly. I'm glad to hear that then. To Aizen and Bree, so that they may leave on a great adventure. Denmir yelled out while holding up his cup filled to the brim with beer. He was one of the first to arrive and already had quite a good amount of alcohol in his system, despite still being relatively sober. Now that everyone was there, he decided to voice a toast for the two companions that would be leaving on their first journey together soon. In accordance to Denmir's toast, the others held their cups up as well, exclaiming, to Aizen and Bree. In synchronicity. After this, the party only really started. For the next few hours, they ate, drank, talked and laughed together, enjoying the last evening they would have together for a while. And at this point, Aizen noticed something new. This was the first time he has actually been drinking a lot of alcohol besides on the first day that he started playing the game. Back then, he got drunk very, very quickly, but now he was able to drink around as much as during his younger days. Maybe that was because of his endurance stat. It was truly an interesting stat. It gave him more health and increased his defense at the same time, and at the same time allowed him to work in the state of absolute non-fatigue that he entered during crafting or combat. And lately, he has been noticing that he needed less and less sleep the higher his stat rose, and seemingly it also heightened his resistance toward things like poison or alcohol. That was quite useful to know, but especially if Aizen ever wanted to enjoy a lot of alcohol at once. And since his stats would only keep growing, his resistance would only grow with it. And as such, all in the name of science of course, Aizen set himself the goal to find out the current limit of his body, waving at the waitress currently standing behind the bar, since the innkeeper who usually stood there was sitting at the table with the group. Another round, please. The next morning, Aizen stood up together with the sunrise, feeling as refreshed as ever. His body was rid of the alcohol he consumed the night before, and his wallet was rid of a lot of its weight, meaning that Aizen didn't have to carry so much anymore. Meaning that this was a perfect start to Aizen and Bree's first journey. They both decided that it would be best to wait until Juk woke up, so that they could properly say goodbye to him as well. An interesting thing that they discovered, though, was that his beasts were slowly starting to become overgrown as well, and moss was woven into their fur as they slept next to their master. Aizen wondered if something similar would happen with him and Kuria as well at some point, and whether or not she would just turn into a small metal statue of herself. But until then, they really didn't have too much to do. And since Juk could wake up at basically any time now, Aizen didn't want to go the long way to some shop to craft something. Instead, he chose to practice his mana manipulation a bit more, while he would have Kuria continue practicing hers together with her newest skill, plant control. So, Aizen took the wooden flower pot he made before and once more filled it with the soil coming from his magic element, setting the small Myconid child down next to it. Alright Kuria, let's practice again, alright. Show Gramps here how good you are at it already. He exclaimed while putting some of the flower seeds he bought into the slightly warm earth. Kuria nodded happily and burrowed her hands into the dirt, concentrating strongly as she poured her mana into the seeds hidden inside. While she was practicing her own magic, Aizen started doing the same with his own. There was a part about it that he hasn't actually tried yet, which was to directly push out his flame of the earth magic without needing to first use his actual pure mana and then infusing it with his element. Instead, he always took the long route around. So, Aizen grabbed the book about mana manipulation and began reading through the part about the task he wanted to try out. It described the process quite simply, actually. The best way to use his magic for now was to try and infuse it into his mana while it was still inside of his body. Apparently he would be able to push out the pure elemental magic at some point, but that was still a while off considering his current skill rank. And since that was the case, Aizen simply followed the instructions. First, Aizen gathered some of his mana in his hand and formed a ball, of course still inside of his body, and then slowly moved his magic element toward it, slowly pushing it inside of the small sphere. For a while, it seemed as if the mana was completely rejecting the element, but once Aizen willed it to more strongly than before, it really changed. As Aizen looked at his hand in response to the weird feeling underneath his skin, he noticed a small change. A tiny spot, the part of his skin closest to the sphere of infused mana, began to faintly glow like a flame behind a sheet of paper, while it also turned slightly brittle like dried earth. In response, Aizen was obviously surprised, and immediately tried to push the sphere of mana out of his hand, resulting in it breaking through his skin and shooting forward. Luckily, Aizen didn't change the state of the element yet, so it simply dissipated the moment it hit the wall, since it was neither truly solid so that it would break or crack the wood, nor was it hot enough to scorch it in any way. When the old man looked back at his palm, he saw that his skin changed back to normal. But this kind of thing made Aizen quite curious about something. This time around, Aizen filled out his whole hand with his mana, then slowly infusing it with his element. As the infusion spread through the space occupied by his mana, his hand began to change. It was as if it turned into earth and then cracked open to reveal the flames underneath. But at the same time, his skin didn't seem to have changed into earth, as it was slightly shifting with his movements, which meant that it was simply like the pure state of his flame of the earth magic, albeit a slight bit more shifted toward its earthen state, while the crack inside of it seemed to be shifted a slight bit more toward flames. For some reason, Aizen thought he might have figured out part of the reason why his element became Flame of the Earth. He burrowed through Bree's backpack until he found his hammer, then took it into his hand together with a small iron ingot that Aizen wanted to practice transmutation on for a bit. But now, Aizen wanted to do something else. Immediately when he grabbed his hammer, he activated tool connection, and it seemed as if the state his hand was in shifted toward his hammer, enveloping the whole handle together with some of the metal part of the hammer in the cracked earth. Excitedly, Aizen began to hammer onto the piece of iron. He knew that this wouldn't allow him to actually forge anything, but it was enough to slightly dent the metal, which the system seemed to count toward blacksmithing considering Aizen's intention. And as soon as the shape of the iron slightly changed. Congratulations! You found the true use of your magic element. You are a craftsman by heart, and as such were appointed the element used by many of the greatest craftsmen amongst all the races, the flame of the earth element. The earth that created all, and the flames that destroyed all became one in this element. Now that you found its use, combat damage will drop significantly, while its usefulness during any type of craftsmanship will rise in return. Chapter 84 Leaving You are listening at novelfull.audio. The true use of my magic. Huh, I see. Well, I don't mind even if I can't really use it in combat, that's not my priority after all. But I wonder. What kind of uses does it have for crafting? Aizen thought to himself while scratching his beard with his non-transformed hand, then looked down at the piece of iron that was lying in front of him. It's slightly more bent than it usually should be, even if the blacksmithing skill makes it easier. Interesting. While Aizen was thinking that, a new status message popped up. Do you want to add Flame of the Earth transformation spell to the spell library? Without even needing to think about it, Aizen chose to add it to the spell library. If he was able to activate this state more easily, it would no doubt be useful. But now it was time to test the effect of this transformation. The old man looked down at his hand and smiled. If the hammer that was partially coated in his element was more useful than usual, then what about other tools? Thinking that, Aizen grabbed a small carving knife as well as a small block of wood that he wanted to casually carve on in his spare time, and then activated tool connection with the knife in his transformed hand. The transformation immediately shifted to cover the knife's handle as well, and Aizen excitedly began to carve the small block of wood. Compared to before, it was definitely far easier for the blade to move through the soft wood, which was more than enough for Aizen to come up with a theory, or rather two different theories. The first theory was his tools changed through the effect of the transformation. For the hammer, it would have been that it became harder, while the knife would have gotten sharper. The second theory, however, was that the transformation changed the effect of his skills directly, meaning that blacksmithing or woodworking simply became easier. His hands definitely seemed a bit more nimble, although that shouldn't make too much of a difference when it came to simply hammering onto metal or cutting into wood. The first option seemed to be more likely, considering that the transformation covered his tools as well. Either way, for now, Eisen knew that this would allow him to more skillfully craft things from now on. And he was quite curious about trying something else out as well. Usually, it seemed like skills in this game have a specific name depending on what area they affect, so usually Eisen would have expected the spell to be called something like Flame of the Earth Hand Transformation. Although it was kind of lengthy, that was the naming scheme this game usually had. But it wasn't there this time, and since Eisen could transform parts of his tools as well, he wondered if it was applicable to the rest of his body as well. So, Eisen focused his mana and turned it from its raw state into a semi-solid, the same as he had for his hand just now, and filled his whole body out with it. He then slowly let the element from the center of his heart spread outward to mix with his mana. Soon enough, Eisen noticed the change in his body. It started at his torso, and spreading outward his skin turned into the state that only his hand was in until now. That state that was neither flames nor dirt, but somehow both at the same time. So it does work, huh? Eisen exclaimed and looked down at his body, moving his fingers across his body to feel its changes and to confirm that every part of it truly turned into that different state. Truly interesting. I wonder if this will change how I can move my body overall, then. Eisen muttered to himself, turning and twisting his body to get a better look at himself. He moved his arms around, and saw that he actually had a little bit better flexibility overall. Now there was something else that Eisen wanted to try. Slowly, Eisen concentrated on his body and decided to change the state of his element toward the earth side. As he did, the lightly glowing cracks all over his body disappeared, and his skin became more solid. In this state, his body significantly slowed down and became far heavier than it was before. On the other hand, when Eisen tried a few different things out around the room, he noticed that his strength increased in return. I see this. Ha! Eisen was slightly startled for a second, as his voice seemingly became quite a lot deeper than it was before. But that surprise was just there for a second, and Eisen snapped out of it nearly immediately. Once this was the case, Eisen got excited to see what the other form of his element would look like during his transformation. So, he carefully changed it from earth over to the flames. He did this quite slowly, so that he could make sure he wouldn't accidentally burn his clothes, but it seemed like his equipment was protected from such effects. Not long afterward, Eisen stood there with his body turned into flames. This time around, his body felt far lighter than usual while at the same time having sped up significantly. In return, it seems like he has lost some of his strength. So it's like that, huh? And my voice in this state sounds just ridiculous. Eisen muttered out lowly. He expected his voice to have changed again, but it was kind of like his voice was a few pitches higher, and even Eisen couldn't take himself serious like that. But either way, Eisen felt like he figured out what he should use which transformation for. The flame state should be used in case he needed a lot of precision, while the earth state was perfect in case simple brute strength was needed. This element really was perfect for Eisen. He was able to change his speed or strength quite easily during crafting now. However, there was one problem. I'm feeling quite drowsy. This drains a lot of mana, doesn't it? Eisen muttered out and immediately deactivated this spell, causing his body to change back to normal. In order to get his mana back as quickly as possible, Eisen placed some of the mana pills into his mouth, ate some regularly until he had enough mana, and then changed other pills back into regular potions inside of his mouth since they would give more mana back this way. Phew, this was quite close. But this is really interesting as well. I'm glad I practiced magic this much then. And would you look at that, my flame of the earth magic will probably rank up again soon. Aizen exclaimed happily once he looked at his status, until he heard a familiar voice groan behind him. Is that so? The monkey beast person Juk grumbled lowly as he stood up from his bed and stretched in response to the long time that he spent in his wood state again. Ah, Juk. Great that you're back. Listen, we need to talk about something. The old man said with a smile as he turned around. He began to explain the rough situation, that he and Bree are going to be leaving quite soon, and then talked about his most recent new finding about the magic element or that fanatical religion that prays to the five that peaked, as well as Korea's newest skill, plant control. Since Denmir mentioned that the Master of Life, of the five that peaked was able to make forests grow, it was quite probable that Juk would be able to make amazing use of something like this as well. Oh, really? Do I just need to put my mana into seeds to get that skill? Juk asked surprised, and Aizen simply nodded while scratching his beard. At least that's what Korea is doing. It wouldn't hurt to try anyway, thank you, I will try this out soon. That is actually quite useful for me to know. I just reached level 99 before going to sleep the last time. There is apparently a level advancement quest. The message said that because of my status as an original and my playstyle befitting that status, the quest is harder than it usually would be. There's a list of things I need to do. For example, reach at least rank 1 in a few skills, some of which I haven't even learned yet including plant control. I am sure you will get a similar quest once your level is high enough. Juk carefully explained, and Aizen sat down on his bed while closing his eyes in thought. I see. I feel like this may be the first real downside to being originals. Or did you experience another situation that became harder because of it? No, not yet. I will keep you updated about what I find out. And I will also tell you if I will get any rewards that might be in your interest. But until then, I think I should try and see if I can change my occupation somewhere, to one that supports both taming and necromancy. And possibly even skills such as plant control. Do you know of any place? Aizen sat there in thought for a few seconds, but didn't really know any specific place, although he at least came up with a few places to start looking. I don't think so, but you should go and see my friend Moram at his shop Everything Magic. It's not hard to find, don't worry. And if he can't tell you anything, then I would consider looking around at the guilds in the upper area of town, there may be one that can help you in your situation. Juk nodded in response and smiled thankfully. I will do that, thank you. So, when are you and Bree leaving? Ha, why? Want to get rid of us? Aizen laughed loudly and stood up, slapping Juk's back before heading toward the table where Korea was still practicing her plant control. No, that's not it. I just... Don't worry, I was just joking. Come on, let's get Bree and then I'll show you the carriage. While Aizen was saying that, he cleaned up the table and got rid of the soil, patting Korea's head when he saw that he managed to actually make quite some progress with her skill. Okay. About an hour later, all preparations were officially done. Aizen showed Juk the carriage, and then the two of them talked with Bree for quite a while, until the Fae, Kin and the giant, dwarf halfling decided to set off. This past month that Aizen has spent in Melro was deeply etched into his mind. The new friends he made, and all those amazing things that he saw and experienced brought him out of the hole that was his life for the past few years, after that damned robber broke into his house. For 2 years, day after day he lived a hollow life, in which he couldn't even lift some of the tools he used for weeks on end sometimes, and wasn't capable of properly cleaning up in his own house until a few months after his operation. And not to forget the numerous scars on his arm coming from that incident that kept reminding him of his own incompetence every single day that he opened his eyes. He had lost his happiness, the thing that accompanied him throughout his whole life. He had lost his reason to live. Now, Aizen was able to regain his life in this new world. Chapter 85 Mother Hive. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Aizen was sitting on the front bench of the carriage, looking forward through the forest he and Bree were driving through. While Korea and Olu were in the back, the Myconid still practicing her plant control and the automaton simply laying on the ground as if she was napping. The Fae Kin on the other hand was actually sitting right beside him, using her scanner skill to search for an important part for the Adventurers Guild's request that Aizen took a few days ago. She was currently looking for a beehive large enough to possibly contain a honey crystal. When they were in areas that had the right conditions, she kept doing this while Aizen was driving. It's already been about 5 hours since they started driving, and they finally left the mountainous area close to Melro and were now in relatively flat land, making the drive both much easier, as well as much more boring. But Aizen didn't mind. He enjoyed the beauty of nature and hearing the forest's birds chirping all around him. And there was even something that made him even happier, as Aizen learned the riding-driving skill about an hour ago, and it was leveling up quite nicely. According to Bree, this skill wouldn't only help with driving the carriage, but also the control he had when riding any creature. While checking up on it every once in a while, Aizen also continued to practice some of his other skills that he could while doing something else. This meant that Aizen activated skills like his truth-seeing eyes, or even a dwarf's hands, the latter of which he managed to gain proficiency in through simply playing with a marble in his fingers for a while. It didn't give him much proficiency, but still enough let him gain his first ever rank 3 skill. A dwarf's hands reached level 100 in rank 2, upgrading to rank 3, your hands can now withstand immense heat and pressure, due to ranking. Up your dwarf's hands skill, you gained +1 AGI and +1 END, immense heat. So that means I can handle metal more easily, huh? Aizen whispered to himself, and Bree happened to overhear him. What do you mean? She asked, tilting her head to the side ever so lightly, still looking into the distance to keep an eye out for the beehives. I just got my dwarven racial skill to rank 3, and I was talking to myself about the new effects it got. Aizen laughed lowly, smiling at the young girl next to him. And Aizen knew that she wasn't actually a young girl, despite looking like it, but compared to him, most people were young, so Aizen didn't really care too much. Oh. That's cool. Aizen, stop the carriage, I found some beehives. The carriage came to a halt as Kabaram slowed down in response to Aizen's command. Soon enough, it seemed like Aizen would be able to finally start brewing one of his favorite alcoholic drinks. But of course, Aizen wouldn't just leave the carriage in the middle of the road, but instead he decided to park it behind a nearby thicket. Alright, let's check them out then. Kabaram, if anyone or anything beside us comes close to the carriage, try make as much noise as possible. We won't be too far away. Aizen explained to his automaton, hoping that it wouldn't be necessary for it to do so. So now, Aizen, Korea, Bree and Olu made their way in the direction that Bree saw the beehives in, and soon enough they found a small hive in a hollow tree stump. Although, small was quite relative, since the bees themselves were around 2 or 3 times larger than regular bees, so of course the hive's size grew in proportion to that as well. Once Bree confirmed that these were honeybees and that there was a honey crystal inside of the hive, Aizen grabbed a small mana crystal that he prepared just for this situation. It had a simple enchantment that was supposed to expel heavy smoke. Attached to it was another small mana crystal with a regular mana storage enchantment, which Aizen then quickly began filling with his mana. He hurried up and quickly, with the furthest distance possible, placed the mana crystal into an opening of the hive. Immediately afterward, the group quickly retreated a safe distance, and waited for about half an hour or so. Aizen didn't really know how well this method would work and whether or not bees could be smoked out regularly in the game, but at least it was worth a try. And Aizen deliberately made the mana battery so small so that it would actually run out within half an hour, and he had already tested this a few times before. So, when the smoke finally stopped, Aizen and Bree both hurried forward to the nest and looked through it. Soon enough, Aizen managed to find the pinky dot-sized honey crystal in the center of the hive, and then quickly made his way back to a safe distance. After inspecting the crystal a little bit, he found that it actually looked quite different to what he thought. Eisen figured that it would just be a honey-colored crystal similar to a mana crystal, but instead, it was actually made up of the hexagonal shapes of a honeycomb, as if it was a completely crystallized part of a hive. Interesting. Bree, what do you actually use this for? Eisen asked the Fey-kin next to him curiously, and she answered quite quickly. As far as I know, it strengthens the whole hive, and it keeps growing and growing until it is large enough to house a significant portion of bees as its own hive. The bees that are hatched inside of it are usually stronger and more special than regular bees. I think the one that requested these was a beekeeper that wants to make more honey, probably. She explained, and Eisen nodded in response. Really? These will be quite useful at some point to me too, then. We need only 4 more of these for the request, let's get some for ourselves afterward. Eisen suggested, before the small group made their way over to the next hive in the area. For some reason, there really were quite a lot of them here, and Eisen could just hear light buzzing coming from basically every direction. At least this would make it easy to finish the request. Soon, Eisen packed away the 10th honey crystal inside of Bree's backpack. The first few that Eisen gathered were really quite small, but soon enough, there were a few larger hives with larger honey crystals inside. Actually, the amount of hives also largely increased, and that seemed to be the case because of one quite large structure. It was a giant beehive that formed itself around multiple old trees that collapsed onto a pile. It was so large that if you could hollow it out, it would be large enough for a small family to live in. Eisen, be careful, that's a mother hive. Bree exclaimed the moment that she laid eyes on it, and Eisen stared forward onto the structure. A mother hive. So it's something like the core for all of these hives in the area. Eisen asked himself, trying to figure out the best course of action. Some of these bees certainly looked quite large, even bigger than the regular honeybees that they took care of until now. And there was a large greater variety of bees as well, as if most of these had evolved into rank 1 already. Maybe if there was a honey crystal there, it would be even better than a regular honey crystal. So, how dangerous is it? Eisen asked his companion, who began to analyze the situation immediately. It's not too bad. Considering our level, individual bees shouldn't be able to do much, if any, damage to us, but the problem is that there are so many of them. But it might be troublesome if the hive continues to grow. How so? Eisen asked curiously, and it seemed like Bree began to shudder as she began to talk. You see. She started to tell Eisen about a situation that occurred when a mother hive was simply allowed to keep growing. This happened on a quite remote island in the south, which is also why nobody was able to get rid of it properly. First, it started out as a regular hive that was erected above a mana vent, a central point where large amounts of natural mana came together, which let the hive grow into a mother hive. Over years, that mother hive in the size of a small house continued to grow until it was the size of a small castle instead. And then a fortress, before it became large enough to house a whole town. And soon enough, the whole island was taken over by a single giant hive. Luckily, since different guilds set up a barrier near the island, and due to the sheer distance between the island and the continent, none of the bees were able to escape and make their way somewhere where they could cause harm to people. This is weird, though. A mother hive shouldn't come into existence without such a large mana source like a mana vent, but the only one around here should be near the mines in Melro. Then how did it get so large? It seems to be quite young as well. I think it would be best to simply destroy it, then. Maybe we can find something like a clue afterward. Eisen suggested, and immediately grabbed the smoke-enchanted mana crystal, thinking about whether or not this would be enough. He briefly thought about just burning the hive down, but he couldn't do that either because that might cause a giant forest fire in response. And just storming inside was an obvious no-go as well. He also thought about using his Flame of the Earth transformation, but that was just way too risky. Who knew if he could even damage monsters with his flame-body, and since it drained too much mana, it was possible that he might pass out in a mass of bees. Bree, do you have any idea on how we should handle this? Aizen asked his companion that kept staring at the large beehive in front of her. I think I do, yes. The type of bee that makes up the largest amount of the hive's forces is really attracted to the smell of blood. Especially that of people, although beasts work too. If we can lure them away, we can try to set up a small anti-fire barrier around it, and then burn the whole thing down. Without a hive, the hive's forces will die soon enough. Attracted to blood, huh? If that's the case, then Aizen had an idea how he could handle this. Aizen stepped behind Bree and opened up her backpack, grabbing a large wooden bowl and a knife, as well as some health pills. For the next part of the plan, they stepped a bit further away so that they didn't accidentally attract the bees beforehand. When they were a bit away, Bree looked around into the distance as if searching for something. It might take a while until we find a beast, so. Aizen, what are you doing? Bree's reaction was quite reasonable considering the thing that was going on in front of her. Aizen just took the knife and cut deep into his hand, letting as much of his blood drip into the bowl while keeping a close eye on his HP counter that started to slowly tick down. Didn't you say they prefer the blood of people? Yes, I did, but that doesn't mean you should hurt yourself for it. Bree exclaimed and squatted down onto the ground next to Aizen to take a look at the wound. But it doesn't really hurt all that much. It's fine this way. As long as my HP stays high enough, I will be alright. Aizen tried to assure Bree that everything was alright, but it seemed like she wouldn't be convinced so easily. And Aizen did understand her, since nobody wants to see their friend cut their own hand open for a plan you yourself suggested. But once Aizen managed to get enough blood and took the health pills, the cut quickly closed back up. It was time to destroy this hive and get the giant honey crystal that had to be waiting at its center. Aizen, race. Giant, dwarf halfling, occupation. Omni Craftsmaster, level. 71, HP. 1887, MP. 1898, STR. 106, End. 107, AGI. 104, Int. 107, Wis. 108, Cha. 11, Titles, Casanova, Champion, Original of the Mechanical Arts, Limit Breaker V, Skills, A Dwarf's Hands, Rank. 3, Level. 4, A Giant Strength, Rank. 2, Level. 81, Alchemy, Rank. 2, Level. 49, Blacksmithing, Rank. 2, Level. 58, Cooking, Rank. 0, Level. 68, Crafting Space, Rank. 2, Level. 6, Dismembering, Rank. 0, Level. 1, Drawing, Rank. 1, Level. 6, Enchanting, Rank. 2, Level. 12, Flame of the Earth Magic, Rank. 1, Level. 97, Golmancy, Rank. 0, Level. 68, Leatherworking, Rank. 2, Level. 16, Lockpicking, Rank. 0, Level. 1, Mana Copy, Rank. 1, Level. 26, Mana Double, Rank. 2, Level. 46, Mana Manipulation, Rank. 2, Level. 48, Riding Driving, Rank. 0, Level. 79, Swordsmanship, Rank. 2, Level. 75, Tailoring, Rank. 2, Level. 45, Taming, Rank. 1, Level. 97, Tool Connection, Rank. 1, Level. 98, Truth Seeing Eye, Rank. 0, Level. 58, Woodworking, Rank. 1, Level. 76. Chapter 86 Crystallized Mana. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Using transmutation, Eisen hardened his blood in the bowl a slight bit to make it as thick as possible without actually turning it solid so that it continued to expel a strong bloody scent, but wouldn't be able to move around too much during the next part of the plan. Next, Eisen grabbed a mana crystal and a small mithril needle out of Bree's backpack and made a quick enchantment that would expel enough wind to let the crystal, that was formed into a small bowl dot shape, another small enchanted crystal and the blood itself float just a slight bit above the ground with some form of stability. Once Eisen did that, he quickly created another small mana battery and filled it up, before placing it into the bottom of the mana crystal bowl together with the hardened blood, watching as it slowly began to float in the air. Perfect! Eisen exclaimed with a soft laugh at his small and quick creation, while Bree watched with awe at Eisen being able to make something like this within such a short amount of time, although she was still kind of shaken up at watching Eisen drain his hand of blood. "And what now?" she asked curiously, trying to ignore those thoughts. Instead of telling her what he would do with this floating dot crystal, Eisen simply grabbed it and began walking closer to the mother hive, until he thought he was close enough to be able to attract the majority of the bees inside. Slowly, he let go of the crystal and made sure it was floating properly, then ever so slightly tilted it forward so that it would continue moving on its own. It didn't need to be fast, just be able to get far away. The floating mana crystal then moved forward just like Eisen wanted it to. It seemed somewhat unstable, but it should get a fair distance away from the mother hive at the very least. Next, they waited for the bees to react, and this happened not too long afterward. After a first bee seemed to notice the smell of blood, it turned back to the hive and its antennae began shaking, before a large swarm of even more bees of the same size came flying out, making the hive look somewhat abandoned from the outside. Immediately, Eisen and Bree sprinted forward toward it, and Eisen began guarding Bree while she started setting up the anti-fire barrier by placing down some mana crystals as waypoints, so to speak, before carefully activating the spell, letting a globe of mana encase the whole hive. "Now we only need to set it on fire," Eisen muttered to himself while concentrating some infused mana inside of his hand and turning it into complete fire, which he then fired out of his palm multiple times toward different spots on the hive. At first, it started with small fires here and there, but soon enough, the whole structure was taken over. Some of the bees tried to flee, but since they were only physically weak worker bees, none of them managed to make it past the barrier that was set up and instead simply burned up in the flames, continuing to fuel it even more. The hive broke down onto itself and continued burning up, Eisen and Bree retreating as far away as they could while still fueling the barrier. When the fire grew large enough to be basically impossible to put out, the soldier bees that left the hive in pursuit of the ball of blood that Eisen sent away came back just to find their home nearing ashes. Neither in sadness nor in anger, the soldiers rushed forward right into the flames for one reason, to protect the hive's queen. That was their sole reason to even exist, and it caused the whole colony to be wiped out in one go. Wow, that was actually quite sad. Bree whispered out when she watched the soldier bees basically throw their life away, before the whole structure simply collapsed onto itself. Eisen and Bree sat there in silence for a while, simply watching as this what could have become a serious threat to the area ceased to exist in less than an hour. Once the fire disappeared for the most part, Eisen got to work with getting all of the still slightly hot residues of the hive out of the way using his mana doubles, until he found one especially surprising thing. It was the queen bee, surrounded by mountains of dead soldiers. Her body was basically completely burnt up, and it was coiling its body around a small, fist-sized sphere. Carefully, Eisen grabbed that sphere and activated his truth-seeing eye. As the world around him turned black and white, the small circle that he expected appeared in front of the sphere, and when Eisen concentrated on it, the circle turned into a white notification page. Queen bee egg, rank 0, level 0, an egg, huh? I see. Eisen muttered to himself, handing the egg over to one of the doubles standing next to him, before continuing to move parts of the hive out of the way to look for the honey crystal. This was the thing he was most interested in the first place, so thinking about what to do with the egg came later. Soon enough, Eisen found his target, which had grown to be much, much larger than he expected. The honey crystal of the mother hive was the size of a whole hive itself. It was about the same size of one of the larger hives that he and Bree found in the area just before finding this one. He quickly burrowed his fingers underneath it to try and pick it up, getting the help of one of the mana doubles to do so. It wasn't that it was particularly heavy, but rather that it was too large for him to handle by himself. After bringing the crystal hive out to where Bree was currently picking up the mana crystals she made the barrier with again, the Fey-kin looked at it with large eyes. Whoa! That's so big! Eisen chuckled in response and nodded his head with a smile. Yeah, it really is. And the hive's capsules are even larger than I expected as well. And I know why. There should be an opening there somewhere, right? Inside there should be a smaller crystal as well. Bree explained, and surprised, Eisen looked around the crystal structure until he found that one of the hexagonal capsules was open to the inside. Eisen stuck his hand in and felt around, until he noticed two different crystal structures. With a frown, Eisen pulled out both of them and looked at them closely. Once more, he activated his truth-seeing eye and inspected the items in his hands. First, he looked at the small crystal that looked like a regular honey crystal, albeit slightly lighter in color. Honey crystal, rank 1. Wait, honey crystals have ranks too? Eisen asked surprised. It kind of made sense the more he thought about it, but it was a surprise nonetheless. That's what happens when hives grow this large, the regular honey crystal will start to grow its own, higher. Rank 1. Usually, that would have allowed a sub-hive to form, with even stronger bees, but it seems like that didn't happen yet. Lucky us. Bree explained excitedly, squatting down to inspect the large structure that Eisen just pulled this small crystal out of. However, there was something weird that came out together with it. A small, incredibly heavy crystal that was pitch black all the way through. Eisen was sure that it weighed about 20 kilos on its own, despite only being the size of his index finger. After gulping nervously, Eisen inspected this abnormal crystal next. Compressed crystallized mana, rank 7, H.H. Bree, what's crystallized mana? Eisen asked with his eyes opened wide in surprise. This was the highest rank he has seen of anything so far. So what was it doing in this beehive, next to a rank 1 honey crystal? Bree tilted her head and looked over Eisen's shoulder, and the moment that she saw the crystal, she immediately hit it out of Eisen's hand. What are you doing with that? That's some of the most wicked mana I've ever seen. It was inside of the crystal hive. You mentioned that a hive needs a large amount of mana to grow, so could this be the source of it? Yes. It most certainly is. And it's even rank 7. We need to get rid of this somehow. The Fey-kin held her hands to her head in a panic, trying to think of what to do next. But before she could completely freak out, Eisen tried calming her down. It's okay, don't worry. We can manage something like this, right? Just tell me what this is and what I need to do, alright? Bree nodded slowly and closed her eyes to get her composure back, before starting to explain. That's compressed, crystallized mana. Crystallized mana is just mana that has been turned into a semi-permanently solid form. And it's extremely light as well, which means that this crystal contains a lot of mana, and it has been compressed to an extent that I haven't seen before. And what did you mean when you said that it's wicked mana? Ah. Mana has a color to it as well. It's usually white for most people, but if it's a completely corrupted or evil creature, it can turn black. And this is just complete darkness. Meaning that the creature this comes from is immensely evil, you can be sure of that. This kind of thing doesn't appear out of nowhere, and it's incredibly hard to produce, so I doubt someone just dropped it. I think someone was trying to purposefully create a giant hive like the one I told you about before. Someone was probably trying to wipe out the area around here. We can be happy that we found this so early. Eisen frowned strongly in response to this. If they hadn't found this just now, would that have meant that this would have continued growing? But for what purpose? This might have become a field dungeon, even. Bree muttered out, just happy that such a crisis could be averted. Ha! Field dungeon. Is it like a field boss? Eisen asked confused, and Bree nodded with surprise in her eyes. Yeah, it is. Oh, I guess nobody explained to you what a field dungeon is, sorry. You see, field dungeons are basically mock dungeons that naturally began forming, and usually take up a large area. They're different from regular dungeons, since they don't have dungeon cores to control everything that's going on, but instead it's more like every monster that's part of a field dungeon changes it a little bit, I guess. The goblin town we were at before was also a field dungeon. I see. It's good that we could make sure not another one of those appeared here in the area. Eisen chuckled lowly, thinking that he kind of managed to figure out the reason why this appeared here after all. Juk explained to him that dungeons are something that many players would just love to explore. And if this hive continued growing at the pace that it was now, it might have ended up the perfect size to host a large group of different players to fight against it. At the very least, that was probably the player perspective on why this was here. Eisen just couldn't figure out who, or rather what, wanted to create this from amongst the creatures in this world. There had to be something going on, right? Something that was slowly expanding in the background of this world that would have to be explored by the many players that would undoubtedly start playing this game not too long from now. Even Eisen was quite curious about that. Chapter 87 Mead. You are listening at novelfull.audio. And what are you doing now? Bree asked curiously while Eisen was still searching through the burnt-down hive for something, burrowing through the ashes and shards of what was just here a few hours ago. Right now, I'm looking for honey. I saw that they are stored in something like containers before, but my priority was the honey crystal, so I wanted to look for that first. The old man explained before smiling brightly when he finally found what seemed to be the honey. It was still stored in the hexagonal openings of the hive, but rather than just being liquid honey inside, they were encased in a thin, glass-like layer and could simply be pulled out of the openings as long as no part of the honey capsule was broken. That glass-like layer seemed to be some kind of crystal structure, somewhat similar to the honey crystal but at the same time still different. It was weird to explain, but at the very least it seemed to be pretty durable. Eisen kept looking and handed these capsules to his doubles, which then stacked them up next to the honey crystal, while Bree was waiting outside of the mountain of ashes together with Kuria and Alu. The reason for that was that the parts of the hive were still considerably hot and could burn you quite badly if you weren't careful, and due to the newest effect of his dwarven racial skill, his hands could now deal with that heat as if it was non-existent. Of course there was still quite some heat all around him, not only his hands, but it was nothing that Eisen couldn't handle as long as he didn't touch any of those parts with anything but his hands. In the end, Eisen ended up with about 24 capsules filled with about 2 liters of honey each. This was definitely a huge amount, and if you could properly control bees the size of the ones that made this hive, you would probably have unlimited honey. And it seemed to be quite high quality as well, considering its golden color and perfect consistency. But this honey wasn't the only thing that Eisen found, there were also 5 capsules filled with royal jelly. This was a substance used to feed queen bee candidates to have them properly mature into their role. Considering that he found a queen bee egg, maybe that meant he could tame it in the same way as he did with Kuria, and then feed it the royal jelly to make sure it really became a queen bee. At the very least, that would be a good start toward producing his own honey. But before then, the egg would actually need to hatch, and that might take a while on its own. The royal jelly was basically vacuum sealed like this, so it was hard to imagine that it could really spoil easily. Before returning to the carriage with the capsules, Eisen grabbed quite a large amount of empty capsules from the hive as well. These were actually still completely sealed, although Eisen expected them to be broken and simply have spilled their contents when he first saw them, but this wasn't the case in the slightest. Although Eisen had no idea why there were such empty capsules there, Eisen didn't mind too much either, since he could use these for something later. Eisen, Bree, and the two doubles now brought all of those honey and royal jelly capsules back to the carriage, that was only about a 10-minute walk away, and then Bree stayed with the carriage to properly sort everything in and make space for the large honey crystal which Eisen went to retrieve together with his doubles. This crystal was then neatly placed down in the corner of the carriage, before the group decided to depart again, with only Bree sitting in the front this time around, since Eisen had some other plans. First, he wanted to make something to hold the perfectly round queen bee egg, just to make sure that it couldn't roll around somewhere. For that, Eisen simply grabbed a small piece of wood and began carving a shallow bowl with just the right curvature for the egg and a completely flat bottom to create something like a small wooden pedestal. Afterward, he quickly sanded its surfaces and finished it with the same solution that he used on all the wood this carriage was made with. While that was drying, Eisen simply placed the egg on a small piece of rolled-up cloth and got to the next part that he was working toward for a while now. He grabbed a large metal pot that Eisen bought for this purpose. In addition to that, he also grabbed a few other smaller items, simple bubbler airlocks that would be filled with water to let the gases emitted through the fermentation escape. Now, all that he needed to do was add the ingredients. First, Eisen added about 3.5 liters of the water coming from the distillation process of making health potions and set the pot above a flame. Enchanted mana crystal, carefully watching everything to make sure the wood wouldn't suddenly start burning. But at the same time, Eisen also prepared a few small cloth bags, some filled with Amaranth while others were filled with Byron petals. Once the water came to a boiling point, Eisen turned off the mana crystal and let the water slightly cool down again, before carefully removing one of the flat hexagonal sides of 2 of the honey capsules, pouring 3.5 more liters of honey into the water, then began stirring the 2 liquids together before adding all of the bags filled with Amaranth into it. While it was still hot, Eisen poured in another 7 liters of water from the large barrel filled with the leftover potion. Water and waited for the right temperature to add the yeast. Luckily, that temperature was simply room temperature, so it was quite easy to get this part right. Once Eisen stirred the mixture some more, he placed a slight bit of yeast that he needed for the whole amount of mead to ferment properly into the pot, and then continued to stir it in. Eisen let it sit like that for a little while with the lid on top closed, while he cleaned up the containers that he would use to store the soon-to-be mead in. The empty capsules that Eisen picked up at the hive. Not only were they aesthetically pleasing, but due to their neat and basically perfect geometric shape, they were quite easy to store as well. So, with simple transmutation, Eisen opened up a hole in the top of the crystal-like structures and one after another filled them with the mead mixture, making sure that each of them had the same amount of Amaranth. Petal-filled bags inside. Then, Eisen filled the bubbler airlocks with a little bit of water and closed the top of the capsule so that each airlock was firmly attached and couldn't budge. Once Eisen had filled about 7 of these empty capsules, Eisen moved on to repeat this exact same process once more, just using the water coming from the mana potion distillation as well as the Byron petals instead. And just to use it as a base to compare both types of mead with, Eisen made another 2 capsules worth of regular mead, using water from the self-filling water cups, not adding any herbs or fruits to it at all to get the purest possible taste and version of mead out of it. Alright, done. Eisen exclaimed excitedly, happy that he managed to make this much mead at once, and that he found the perfect natural containers for it at the same time. But the next step was cleaning up. Eisen made sure to properly remove the rest of the honey still stuck in the just-opened containers, even scrubbing them out as much as possible. After doing the same for the large pot, he poured the water he used to clean everything down onto the street through the back door, and then sat down on the bench, at night the bed, next to his work table. He had previously opened up some space for Kuria to continue practicing her newest skill, and to Eisen's surprise, she actually managed to rank the plant control skill up. And all of these actions seemed to have given her enough actual experience to be able to rank up herself, and with that evolve, soon again, as she was currently at rank 1, level 99. Why she managed to level up so immensely quickly was completely unknown to Eisen, but it was probably because she has been doing nothing but practice her plant control for multiple days. Oh, wow. You're so amazing, aren't you, Korea? Aizen smiled while looking at the result of her practice, the small yellow flower that was just short of completely blooming. With a smile, Aizen watched while the small myconid continued pouring her mana into the flower, finally making its petals unfold and revealing the beautiful shape of nature. In tandem with this, Korea's body began to glow faintly in a white light as her figure grew and slightly changed. She was now about 40 centimeters tall, and had a much more humanoid body. Before, she was simply a tube with a cap and more tubes attached to act as limbs, but now she actually had slight curves anybody had, as well as somewhat well-defined limbs. Korea had something resembling actual joints now, like elbows and knees, as well as proper hands and feet, although her feet were simply in the rough shape while her fingers were still just mostly tubes, and didn't really look like fingers too much. Her whole body was quite thin, especially her arms and legs, giving her a quite frail look. And on top of that, her cap also changed. Instead of simply looking like a dome that was placed on her body, its shape began resembling that of a witch or wizard's hat, although just roughly. Overall, her skin remained the same white it has always been, while her cap was still a bright red with white circles everywhere. Congratulations! Korea evolved into a myconid druid disciple. A druid disciple, I see. So that means this really is the path for her to become a druid, then. Aizen exclaimed excitedly, placing his hand on Korea's cap to praise her. Good job, sweetheart. Come on, let's stop practicing for a bit, and come to the front with me, okay? Aizen asked, and it seemed as if Korea was panicking for a second. She looked around, and when she saw the wooden flower pot standing a bit lower than she was used to, calmed down. This made a lot of sense, to be fair. She suddenly grew quite a lot, so it must be hard to get used to such a new perspective all of a sudden. But when she saw that the flower pot was still there, Korea picked it up with her new fingers and held it in front of Aizen, her like eyes glittering in excitement. Yeah, I saw what you did. You're really amazing. Aizen chuckled and kept praising her since he thought that's what she wanted to hear, but instead of being happy about it, she shook her head and pushed the flower pot directly onto Aizen's chest, making the old man realize what she meant. Oh, this is for me? He asked happily, and Korea nodded her head a slight bit. I see, thank you for such a beautiful gift, Korea. I'll cherish it. With a smile, Aizen took the flower into his hands and placed it on a spot on the shelf where it could be seen from everywhere. Maybe he would even encase it in something like resin if he found something like that here. Happily, Korea then jumped into Aizen's arms before he stepped through the opening in the front, joining Bree on the bench while the myconid was sitting on his lap, excitedly looking through the forest around them. Chapter 88 Druid Disciple Korea. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. It was the next morning, before Aizen and Bree would start driving the carriage again further toward that farming village that Bree mentioned. By the end of yesterday, Aizen even managed to rank up his driving skill, which gave him a slightly higher amount of control over the carriage, which wasn't really shown all that much considering the quality of the carriage. It would have been more useful if they were driving a carriage that was hard to control in the first place. Today, Aizen and Bree would probably reach that village by evening considering the speed they were traveling at. Some might see this as kind of boring, but to Aizen, this just gave him more time to work. And what he wanted to work on was a small dress for Korea. Now that she actually started roughly looking like a young girl, it was kind of weird to have her walk around basically naked. But before then, Aizen and Bree sat down together and ate some breakfast. It wasn't anything special, just a little bit of the dried fruit and meats while the two of them talked to each other. But they didn't need anything special to eat, as long as they got enough nutrition to start out the day properly. After breakfast, Bree started driving the carriage again while Aizen checked up on some things, mainly just to see if the mead was fermenting yet. Usually, it would take about 24 hours for the fermentation process to start, but Aizen didn't know if this was sped up or not. But sadly, Eisen didn't notice anything that might be a sign that the fermentation started yet. So, Eisen grabbed some of the thin red fabrics that he bought, before laying it down on the side of his worktable to start working on Korea's dress instead. First, Eisen made a quick sketch on some paper of what it should look like. The main thing that Eisen could think of was something roughly similar to Bree's, although with a few slight differences. For example, the shoulder straps were thicker and a direct part of the chest part, instead of being simply sewn on, and the bottom for the dress was slightly more puffy and in a stronger cone shape than Bree's. Of course, Eisen was also only using regular fabrics for Korea's dress instead of magic fabrics. Depending on the way she grew up and her looks changed, he may have to make another dress anyway. After all, if she ended up looking like a teenager or grown woman, it wouldn't look great if she was still wearing a child's summer dress. Now, Eisen actually got to work. He cut out the 3 pieces that he needed, the front of the chest, the back of the chest, and the bottom of the dress that would cover the rest of Korea's body. The next step was quite simple, as Eisen only needed to connect the 2 parts for the chest with a regular backstitch, and then got to the bottom of the dress. Eisen managed to figure out a quite simple way of creating that cone shape that he wanted the dress to have, instead of the fabric simply hanging downward. What Eisen did was to, using transmutation, harden the string a slight bit until it was something like a rather thin cable rather than string, keeping his mana as much around the string as possible, and then carefully moved it in between the layers of thread that made up the fabric. This quite easily allowed Eisen to basically shape the dress in any way that he wanted to, as long as he added enough of these hardened strings. And now, Eisen simply sewed the bottom of the dress together at each end, and then sewed its top to the bottom of the chest part. Done! Eisen exclaimed when looking at the small dress laying on the table, before he opened up its information. Red summer dress, quality. Perfect, rank. 3, description, a simple, but high-quality, red summer dress made by the Omni Crafts master Eisen. Effect, +5 END, +5 AGI. Eisen smiled at the result, and was happy that it would even give Korea a few small stat bonuses. And he may have broken through tailoring with this piece again, but since he couldn't get any bonus stats through it anymore, it didn't show him the familiar notification about overwhelming quality items. The old man turned around and looked at the small Myconid who was curiously watching Eisen work while sitting on the carriage's bed. Alright, let's put this on you. Eisen chuckled lowly and prompted Korea to hold her hands up, before moving the dress over her cap, which actually made this quite hard, and dressed Korea up in the red dress that was the same color as her cap. She looked herself up and down immediately afterward and happily jumped at Eisen to hug him again. I'm glad you like it, haha. Actually, let me take a look at your status. I didn't really check after you evolved. Eisen chuckled out lowly, before the small Myconid status simply appeared. Korea, race. Myconid Druid Disciple, Amanita muscaria, owner. Eisen, rank. 2 level. 2, HP. 450, MP. 1170, STR. 16, END. 17, AGI. 20, INT. 58, WIS. 54, Skills, Druidic Nature, rank. 0, level. 1, Mana Manipulation, rank. 1, level. 86, Plant Control, rank. 1, level. 2, Druidic Nature. It seems to be the skill that you got when you evolved again. Eisen muttered to himself while closely looking at the status screen. Since he didn't really know what this skill did, Eisen turned around to look at the amalgamation of useful information that was currently driving the carriage. Hey, Bree, do you know anything about the skill, Druidic Nature? He asked, and Bree slightly turned her head and seemed to think for a while, before yelling her answer through the opening in the front of the carriage. It's just a basic skill for druids. It makes them more connected to nature, so all nature related skills are easier to use. There's some other cool stuff coming at later ranks, but I don't know too much about those. she explained while Eisen joined her back on the front bench, Kuria once more sitting on his lap. I see. That's definitely useful, then. I guess this will just help Kuria grow into a complete druid then. Although I still don't really know what a druid is supposed to do. While chuckling, Eisen took the reins from Bree to let her relax for a bit and level his own driving skill. For the next few hours, they continued driving while Eisen continuously activated his truth-seeing eyes skill as well to level it up a bit while he was doing nothing else. Truth-seeing eyes reached level 100 in rank 0, upgrading to rank 1, you can now see the quality of things around you. Due to ranking. Up your truth-seeing eyes skill, you gained +1 INT and +1 WS, in front of Eisen's eyes. This notification popped up the moment that his skill proficiency reached 100. Non-stop, for the past 6 hours, Eisen had these special eyes activated and looked at the information of everything that he saw. Luckily, this didn't completely fill up his sight, since the status information that he accessed through the skill worked different to regular status windows. While those regular notifications stayed around him at all times and followed him around, the information that the truth-seeing eyes skill made available stayed at the item where that information came from. Before now, there were simple white circles in front of an item, but now, he actually saw a little bit of color. When he looked around, he noticed that these circles were now colored differently. For example, the circles in front of Bree's and Kuria's dresses were now both a very vibrant yellow. On the other hand, the shirt he was currently wearing, the black crafting shirt, had a vibrant orange circle instead. So immediately, Eisen came to a quick conclusion, that he would need to confirm further at some point. It seemed like depending on the rank of an item, Eisen was now seeing differently colored circles. And now, it seemed like when he opened status pages of items through his truth-seeing eyes skill, the windows themselves were also in that color. This was definitely quite useful if he wanted to quickly differentiate between high and low quality items, although not for much more. However, considering that the skill only became rank 1 just now, its effects were already quite amazing. Despite the fact that it took far longer to gain proficiency in this skill than other of rank 0, Eisen decided that it was worth it to try and rank it up even further as soon as possible. Eisen gripped the reins harder excitedly and continued using his skill on all kinds of things around him. Although most of them were still simply white, the color that Eisen figured was the color for rank 0 items and objects. That was probably because the things he was mainly inspecting this way were plants and trees by the side of the road. It was only when he saw the tiniest red dot in the distance that Eisen deactivated his skill to be able to see a bit better. After all, while using the skill, Eisen was only able to see in black and white, with an ever so slightly shifted vision the further away he looked. It wasn't too much of a difference, but still enough to make it hard to see things perfectly in the distance. Before Eisen could even make out the source of the red dot, the color for rank 1, Bree already stood up on the bench and happily pointed forward. We're here. That's the farming town I talked about. While Bree was smiling brightly, Eisen narrowed his eyes to try and see what it really was that he saw in the distance, and he saw something reflect the sun, so it was probably a piece of armor belonging to a guard. Only a few minutes later, Eisen could already confirm that this really was the case, and their carriage was stopped directly in front of the wooden gate in the center of the large wooden fence acting as a wall to protect the inhabitants of the town. One of the 2 guards standing in front of the gate held his hand in front of him to signal Eisen that he should stop. Before you enter, we will have to make sure you are not transporting illegal substances. Are we allowed to search your wagon? Of course, of course. Come through the back, please. While saying this, Eisen stood up and made his way to the back door of the carriage and quickly opened it up to let one of the guards inside. He was quite surprised by Alu, and vice versa, but both of them quickly ignored each other and the guard continued his search. He mainly took a look what it was that was stored in the barrels and then left again. Nothing seemed to be too suspicious, after all. All right, clear. The guard told his colleague with a nod, who then quickly opened up the gate to let carriage through, smiling at Eisen as he passed. Have a nice stay in our humble village. And it really was quite a humble village. But that was no bad thing, it just meant that it was quite small compared to a town such as Melrose, and you could see the gate on the other side of the town at the end of the central street. At least it wouldn't be so hard to find the places they wanted to visit. As the gate closed behind them with a creak, Eisen steered the carriage through town until he found a stable. After quickly paying a small fee, he left Kabaram and the carriage there. He would have liked to bring Kabaram as well, but he left him behind so that he could make sure nobody just entered the carriage while Eisen and Bree weren't there. Olu was also still lying down in the carriage as a guard dog, so they shouldn't need to worry about thieves too much. Since it was already getting close to evening, Eisen and Bree chose to stay at an inn for the night, and then buy whatever they needed to by tomorrow morning before departing. So now, they took a look around town while they had the chance. And now that Kuria was too large to sit on Eisen's shoulder, she was walking next to him while he held her hand to make sure she couldn't just run off somewhere and kept up. However, due to the village being quite small, there was not much to look at in the first place. Other than a small smithy, tailor and leatherworker, there weren't many crafters here in town either. There were some small guild buildings, some of them even seemed to be sharing the buildings amongst themselves, but the largest amongst them seemed to be the Merchants' Guild, and directly in front of that guild was the small marketplace, where most people just finished packing up or were still in the progress. On the other hand, there was one young man, maybe in his early 20s, who was sitting at the side of the street on a blanket with a bunch of different items laying on the ground. He was the only one who was still enthusiastically trying to sell things, yelling out a sentence that grabbed Eisen's attention. "Find the best items in the whole town, nay, even the whole country. They have passed the Omega test of approval, so you can be sure they are top quality." Chapter 89 Comer. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Omega. Eisen muttered to himself as he heard the young man yell this out. He definitely knew that from somewhere. Could it be that this man was another player? If he was, Eisen should probably try and figure out a way to convey that he also is a player. There was a quite simple way to do that. Eisen squatted down in front of the blanket that the items the man was selling were lying on while Bree was looking around at another stall. "So, you're an Omega." Happy that there finally was a potential customer, the man crossed his arms smugly and nodded. "Exactly. I'm one of those people that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Do you not want to see what such an amazing and mysterious being has to offer?" Eisen looked around himself to make sure there really were only the man and Kuria around him. He may have said he was a player, but there might be some person from this world trying to take an advantage of such a situation, so Eisen wanted to confirm the situation. It was kind of risky, so he would have preferred not having to use this, but Eisen held his hand in front of his eyes, only leaving a thin slit open to see through, and activated his truth-seeing eyes skill to appraise the man. The thing about appraising others was that it also seemed to show whether or not someone was a player, but since Eisen didn't possess a regular appraisal skill anymore, he could only use the skill that literally changed the way his eyes looked, and he didn't just want to reveal the fact that he possessed it. But luckily, the information window that popped up in front of the man really confirmed the situation. Player. Comer, race. Human, occupation. None, level. 4. Eisen quickly deactivated his skill and then extended his hand toward the Omega player Comer to greet him. "Nice to meet you. I'm one of the originals, do you know what that is?" Instinctively, Comer shook Eisen's hand without even realizing what he said, and only in the middle of that greeting did he think about what this old man in front of him was talking about. An original. So you're also a PLA. Comer held his hand in front of his mouth immediately before he managed to finish this sentence. You were not supposed to mention players to the NPCs in the game, and there was a little girl next to the man who didn't seem like another player. Eisen realized his worries as well, and began to chuckle lowly. "Don't worry, she's a tamed monster. We can talk about it in front of her." Eisen explained, and this really seemed to be the case. At least there was never a penalty when talking about being a player in front of Korea or Juk's beasts before, so that seemed to be so that players choosing to be tamers could talk to other players freely. After all, tamed beasts had to be quite close to you most of the time. Oh, I see. Then you're also a player. One of the 5 that were mentioned when I started playing. Kemmer tilted his head to the side and used his appraisal skill, his highest rank skill so far at rank 2, on Aizen. When he did so, Aizen felt slight shivers all over his body, the same feeling back when Belrim appraised him when he first got to Melro. This really was an uncomfortable feeling, but Aizen couldn't complain since he also technically appraised Komer just now. But before Aizen could even answer, Komer opened his eyes wide in surprise. Ha! I can't see any information about you beside your name. Aizen, right. Ah, that is quite natural. You used the appraisal skill, it seems. When trying to appraise someone with a much higher level than yours, you simply don't get much information. And yes, my name is Aizen, oh, really? Are you amazingly strong, then? Ah, I'm Komer, by the way. Nice to meet you. Komer stood up so that he and Aizen could talk more easily, looking the old man up and down. While Komer was still wearing the clothes that he got when he first started playing, Aizen already wore a quite high-quality outfit. To Komer, it seemed like he was a big spender, so the perfect person to try and sell some of these items to. Aizen chuckled lowly and scratched his beard while shaking his head. I'm nothing special, young man. I'm just strong enough to properly enjoy myself. A wide grin grew on Komer's face, as it seemed more and more like Aizen was the perfect person to sell these overpriced items to. If he wanted to enjoy himself, he would probably just leisurely walk around the world without worrying about what was going on around him. Komer didn't really know what the originals did in order to be able to play the game earlier than even large investors like his father's company, but considering this man's apparent age, he was most certainly just the father or grandfather of some big executive of Prime Industries. After all, who would deliberately make themselves this old and just be treated like an old man in the game without actually being one? Ah, so you want to enjoy yourself. Then I hope you're properly protected. You don't seem to have a weapon on you, and this little girl over there doesn't seem like she's too strong either. Would you like to buy one of my weapons? The young man asked, planning to double, or maybe even triple the price that he originally had in mind for his items depending on Aizen's reaction. However, Aizen was anything but the senile old man that Komer thought to be dealing with. Times and times again, Aizen had to deal with salesmen that wanted to take advantage of old men like that. But he didn't blame Komer, after all he seemed to be quite young and inexperienced, so it would probably still be possible to turn the way he acted toward customers around with a proper influence. In order to properly educate this youth, Aizen chose to play the role that Komer expected. Ho, a weapon. Maybe I may actually buy one of these. Could you show me what you have for sale? There seems to be quite a large selection, so how could I ever choose? Happily, Komer squatted back down and grabbed 2 different items, a bow and a dagger. Neither of them seemed to be in especially good condition, to be honest. The wood for the bow was horribly chosen, and far too hard and inflexible so that it would basically snap with a single pull of the string, which was heavily worn down and stretched out a good bit to make it pretty much useless. If you were actually able to shoot an arrow further than 10 meters with this, it would probably not be able to even give the target much of a scratch. And the dagger was even worse. The handle was made of completely untreated and rough wood, which would give you splinters all over your hand the moment you touched it, while the blade basically didn't have an edge. You would struggle to cut through a banana with such a blade, not to speak of one of the monsters that could be found in the wild. At first, Aizen hoped that Komer was simply trying to show Aizen what not to buy, but it was quite the opposite. I would suggest these 2. It is an exemplary combination. You can shoot your target with this magnificent bow, and if it should come too close, you can fight it with this dagger instead. But the combination is not the greatest thing about it. This bow is made of the wood of a holy birch tree in the elven forests, while the string was created through the hair of a yeti. And this dagger is even more amazing, good sir, as it has been handcrafted by the master of all master blacksmiths hundreds of years ago, the godly craftsman. Yes, I am talking about nobody else but the craftsman that reached max level through pure skill. Aizen stared blankly at this young man in front of him. This was even worse than he expected. This wasn't just some slight trickery, Comer was simply trying to scam him. Both of these items were at best rank 0 with a below-average quality. At first, Aizen wanted to play along, but this foolery simply hurt his pride as not only a craftsman, but also as a person. Comer, you're joking, right? Haha, why would I be joking, good sir? These items truly are just this amazing. And they're going to be yours for a small price of 1 gold coin. Aizen sighed loudly and took the bow into his hand before snapping the bow in half instantly, not only shocking Comer, but also the few people around that stopped to watch what was going on after Comer basically started shouting through the whole marketplace. Comer, this is not how you should conduct business. Don't worry, I will replace this with an item you really should sell. With a loud sigh, Aizen turned around to Bree and waved her over. As she came into the middle of the crowd, Aizen prompted her to turn around so that he could grab a few tools out of her backpack, which was really only his carving knife. Aizen looked around until he saw a young man carrying quite a lot of wood over his shoulders. The wood seemed to be from quite young trees that were just completely felled and brought here in one piece. Quickly, Aizen hurried over to the man while Comer was staring at him in confusion, and then he bought one of the young trees from him. They seemed to be maple-like trees with good strength and flexibility, so quite perfect for a bow. Bree, could you dry this quickly? Aizen asked his Fey-kin companion, who nodded happily and quickly cast a spell on the wood. It was really quite useful to have these types of spells, although most of them couldn't really be used for much. After it was dried enough, Aizen turned to Bree and made his next request with a smile. Bree, I need some string. Could you get some of the regular magic thread from the carriage? Not the one that I used to make your dress, but the one without the growth enchantment. And bring some of the solution I used to treat wood as well, please. Okay. And like that, Bree quickly hurried off as Aizen thanked her, before the old man quickly got to work. He squatted down onto the ground next to the blanket that Comer set up for his items and began debarking the tree that was about 6 feet long, but of course only after activating his crafting space for woodworking, as well as his flame of the earth transformation to infuse it into his knife as well. The knife moved along the surface of the wood without any trouble, as if it was simply cutting through air, one stroke after another, slowly removing the whole bark. When this was done, Aizen began preparing the general shape of the bow. He carved a thin spot in the center where you would hold it that was surrounded on both sides by the 2 thickest parts of the bow, although there was only about a 1/4 inch difference between these thicknesses. The further toward the ends of the bow, the thinner did Aizen carve it. And just before Bree returned with the string and finishing solution that he needed, Aizen made the bow itself a bit thinner and rounder all around so that it was more comfortable to grab. After that, Aizen only made a few small grooves to attach the string to at each end of the bow as well as his craftsman sigil right next to the center, and then continued to quickly sand its surface and applied the finishing solution to its surface, then had the bow held by one of his mana doubles so that he didn't need to lay it down on the ground somewhere. Then, Aizen grabbed the thread that Bree brought and quickly grabbed its end, twisting it around itself a few times to create a thick, but still flexible, string. With transmutation, he slightly altered its flexibility a slight bit and made sure that the string couldn't somehow come undone at any point. Since Bree cast another spell on the bow's wooden part to make it dry a bit faster again, Aizen could immediately continue by attaching the string to each end of the bow. After quickly testing its flexibility and how well it could be pulled, Aizen was done for the most part. He stood up and looked at its information. Wooden bow, quality. Perfect, rank. 2, description, a wooden bow that has been masterly crafted by the Omni Craftsmaster Aizen. Its string is made out of magic string, allowing the bow to more easily be infused with magic. Effect, plus 15 AGI, plus 5 END.